Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you again. This time we're here with Jordan, and we're going to talk about yield, that thing we all chase in crypto, in real life, in TradFi. Yeah, yield. Jordan?
Yeah, so basically, I think we were sort of inspired in a way by this tweet from Thor, um, where he's like, "Hey, like, where's the best place to park stables these days?" And it's something we hear all the time from different customers or different users, both of Summer and not of Summer. Just in the like DeFi community, it's like, "Hey, where do I get the best yields, or where are the best yields for me today?" And yeah, it's not always super clear how to go about that, where to do that. And we think Summer does a good job of like curating sort of some of those better yields. And yeah, that's kind of what we want to talk about today. We have a tweet thread that we put together that we'll link to. But yeah, at a high level, basically just want to go over some of these, how to think about yields, but really the underlying question of where do these yields, not just how to find them, but like where do these yields like really come from? And we get that question a lot, especially from newer people. It's like, where do these yields actually come from? Because especially in crypto and DeFi, for better or for worse, like the source of the yield has not always been that trustworthy. In some cases, in some projects. So we go through a couple of examples here where, a couple of extremely well-known examples. Celsius was offering people relatively high yield on their crypto. Anchor and UST was offering people very high yield on their dollars, basically, or what they marketed as dollars. And yeah, all of that sort of ended up falling through, because if you don't know where the yield is coming from, you are probably the yield. So we try to explain that basically in this post. And yeah, today we're just going to go over some of the basics. We'll leave the details for the post, but the basics of where the yield actually comes from in DeFi, at least from the best protocols of the ones that you'll find on Summer. And yeah, so yeah, maybe Javier, if you have specific questions around um, where the yield comes from in DeFi and how we can go about talking about that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd like to start with the simplest yield you can get, which are yield-bearing assets. That they are pretty famous now after like as well. WST like this, it has like 100 billion market cap. So instead of just holding ETH in your wallet, you can get a pretty reliable ETH that's already with implied yield. So that has become super famous, and now everyone is like launching their yield-bearing assets. I don't know what's your opinion on that. You like yield-bearing assets, or you just like your plain ETH safe in your wallet?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I think we talk about staking here as like one of the biggest categories. And first, I guess understanding where does that yield actually come from, is really understanding that that yield is coming from being reward, like getting block rewards, and also transaction fees. Basically, there's a whole like a MEV portion to that, but it's a little bit more complicated, that we didn't really put into this. But the LSTs are, well, you have the staking itself that you can do on your own, which I think is a little bit different than the LSTs and the liquid staking tokens, that you can also use as collateral. But I do like, I'm kind of 50-50 on it. Like, even though that doesn't make a total amount of sense, a huge amount of sense, because if something happens to staked ETH, it probably has implications for ETH. But for me, yeah, I don't know. I feel safe. I feel safer having some ETH and staked ETH as well. But yeah, I think the best approach is actually having a diversified approach to your staking providers, and also solo staking yourself if you can do it. I think that's probably the best approach. Which we talk about the diversification of yields below at the last tweet. So that's pretty interesting. Yeah, so maybe it makes sense to get into like another type of source of yield here, or actually before that, maybe we can just like touch on what you should really be thinking about um, if you choose staking as the option, because I think staking is one of the um, types of yield generation that can be really abused by some projects. So of course, if you're staking ETH or if you're staking Sol with Jupiter or something, or Jito, I think is actually the Sol staking thing, liquid staking thing, uh, is some of these assets that allow for staking are not great assets. They're not great blockchains in a lot of ways. And so that's what you really have to watch out for, I think, is just because it's staking and you're earning yield from staking, you shouldn't be impressed by that or something, because you really need to think about, well, do I actually want exposure to this asset? Um, Even though you're getting staking rewards. And that even goes for ETH to a degree. Like if you don't believe in ETH, like you probably shouldn't stake ETH for the yield if you don't actually want to hold ETH. But perhaps that goes without saying. So
Yeah,
yeah,
because I mean, regarding the yield, you're holding the asset. So yeah, if you
exactly.
don't trust the asset or the blockchain or whatever you think that now everything can be staked, yeah, you're you're not gonna make it probably. So yeah.
Exactly. Um, I guess we'd be remiss to say that one thing that is really cool with that we share a link here with staking is the fact that you can use these staking assets as collateral to borrow against, get liquidity from, also multiply. So, and that's made really, really easy on Summer. So you should check that out if that's something you're interested in as well.
Yes, definitely one big bold move about these staking assets, just like those ETH or etc. Any other assets, is that you can use it in DeFi. It's just another DeFi Lego to play with, or to, yeah, not to play with, but to take carefully, to take a look.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's get into the next one. So the other type of yield that you can get in DeFi is basically lending. Um, and maybe you want to talk about this one, Javier. Like, yeah, what is this like? Um, and yeah, how is the yield? Where does the yield come from in lending, and maybe how do some of them differ a little bit?
So lending, something that Summer.fi is famous for, where you can basically use your collateral to borrow some funds, and then you can do like whatever you want with them. Like, you can buy stuff from your real life, or you can buy more collateral, you can multiply, you can earn on those assets. But where does it come from? Well, that's easy. When you lend your assets, someone else is borrowing. So that borrower is paying you for your assets. So that's basically where it comes from. It's a real organic yield. It's not inflated by, well, sometimes you get some extra token rewards, but you can say that's the closest thing to a real yield that's out there, in my opinion. You have a lot of experience with lending, Jordan. So yeah. Mm.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I would maybe mention with the lending is, yeah, I think this one is really straightforward, and in my opinion, probably if you getting yield in DeFi, this is where I would what I would feel most comfortable with, what I personally feel most comfortable with as well. It's not like financial advice or anything, but that's what I feel most comfortable with. Why? One, because you have a little bit of choice on the type of asset that you want to use. So if you want to get USD or stablecoin yield, you can use those. If you want to get ETH yield, you can use those. If you want, etc. And I think also something to consider is the risk trade-offs that the protocols make. So on Aave, of course, you have lending and you're in a specific market, but you do kind of have exposure to the wider markets that they allow for. Basically, you do have that risk in a way, whereas Morpho kind of has these isolated markets. So you can think about your risk in a little bit more of a concentrated way. So that's pretty nice, I think. And then Maker, and I'm just conflating Maker and Spark here with DAI savings rate, is it's probably the safest, I would say, of all the different ones. I'm hesitant to even call it lending per se. I mean, it is in a way, because it's generated from the stability fees that are paid by borrowers on the in the Maker protocol. But yeah, it's I guess yeah. I guess you could consider it lending, but Maker sense the conservative approach, and all of these other things, I would consider that probably the safest. But um, yeah, lending is a very easy to understand source of yield, and even though it's probably not going to give you the highest yield, at least it's something that you can sleep well, understanding and knowing what the risks are and where it's coming from. So yeah, and of course, all very curated on Summer. So if maybe a protocol that is not very high integrity is claiming to be giving you yields from lending, you don't have to really worry about that on Summer, because we do a lot of that due diligence for you.
Yes, and adding to the DSR, it's been always known as the risk-free rate in DeFi. Of course, it's not risk-free, but it's like the benchmark always for what is a good rate, a good yield in DeFi.
Absolutely, definitely.
Yeah, that Maker conservative style has always put them like on the top of the quality yield, let's call it maybe.
Yeah. Cool. I guess the next one here is like liquidity providing, which is something that we don't do a lot of on Summer, for a few reasons. One, it's a little bit like it can be a little bit complicated to understand, and it can be a little bit misleading. Mainly because depending on the pair that you provide liquidity for, there is sometimes where you can end up with the worst asset, basically the one that is the one that has been performing not as well, which is maybe not what you want, and you have to kind of reason about it in a really great way or smart way. I think we've seen this a lot with like Uniswap v3, but at least the how the yield is generated is again pretty straightforward, and this is what this whole thing is about, is understanding like yields that are clear where the yield is actually coming from. And in liquidity providing, it's generally coming from the trading fees that are being generated in that pair. So, of course, if you have more volatile pairs, you can expect a higher yield. But again, you might get that token that is performing worse, which is maybe not what you want. So the key question here is always to be able to say, hey, like, do you really love both of these assets, and are you willing to really hold both of these assets no matter what? So if that's a USDC ETH pair, or a USDC Wrap BTC, or a DAI MKR pair, let's say, you really have to think about the scenarios in which each token is going up or down, and what you'll actually hold in that case. And does the yield actually compensate you for bearing the risk of holding an asset that is sort of opposite to what the sort of market is doing in a way? So yeah, that's something to really think about. We don't really surface too much about this on, or provide many options for this on Summer, but it's really good to know, because if you're in DeFi, you'll definitely come across being able to be an LP in different pools. And yeah, you should understand where the yield is coming from, and how to interact with those pools, basically. Anything to add, Javier?
Yeah, I had a funny story about liquidity providing. When I first got crypto in early 2021, just after DeFi summer. So yeah, I missed all the good the good DeFi yields. Yeah, all it was, like LPing and this super high APY farms until one day I lost like 90% of what I have, and that's when I learned about impermanent loss, which is what you're talking about
Yeah.
holding the asset that you don't want. So yeah, I think many people still get into DeFi and go, well, I don't think now in 2024, but yeah, it was like your first meeting with DeFi was, yeah, like liquidity providing here and there, and then getting wrecked by impermanent loss. So yeah, it's super, be careful there. So another source of yield are yield loops, which we do offer on Summer.fi and which are very famous like
Hmm.
lately. And Jordan, if you want to explain them, I know you you really love yield loops. So
Yeah, I do like yield loops. I For me it's we talk about it in a bunch of other videos, like uh when the right time is probably to do yield loops. For me it's probably not the right time right now, but I do really like them. Um Now yield loops are kind of a subset of tokens with native yield. So whether that's a staking token, I think that's probably the most well-known one, is the liquid staking like token for ETH, that yield loop. So basically being able to amplify your staked ETH yield. And yeah, all it is basically, hey, you have this native asset that you can use as collateral that has a native yield. You can borrow against that asset, and then using those borrowed funds to buy more of that asset with a native yield. And how you're boosting the yield, or where the yield comes from is the spread between the borrow cost to borrow these funds and the yield that you're basically increasing exposure to. Um, so yeah, really easy example is if you have a 5% yield on staked ETH, and you're being able to borrow for less than that, um, after accounting for however many times you're multiplying that native yield, then you need a positive spread basically, and you'll be able to boost that yield. Now that might seem a little bit complicated, like how do you calculate that? How do you do the math on that and all this different stuff? But on Summer, we make it really, really easy. We always surface the net yield that you'll get. And one other thing that I think is really nice, in understanding not only where this yield is coming from, but also is it sustainable, is we show you the yield over a longer period of time. So especially with the stablecoin yields, sometimes they can look like they'll be profitable, or they're very profitable for maybe a day or a couple of days, but those yields actually tend to converge a little bit quicker. Um, so being able to see what the trend has been over a longer period of time is a lot less misleading, in my view, and I think that's something that Summer does quite well. And we give a link here so that you can go and check it out if you want to. So yeah.
yeah,
Um,
because one of the thing with lending markets are the utilization rate. So
exactly.
your cost of borrowing can go to like 100% or whatever, like a lot of percent, and you will see like a super negative APY, but maybe it just lasts like 2 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours. We don't know. So yeah, showing you a longer a longer rate is it's cool to know the trend. You also have to be very timeful on your yield loops, I think, because if you enter in a, let's say, in a bad rate or in a lower trend, then yeah, you might end up losing money. So it's something to take a look at.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Now the last yield that we talk about here, that we feel is like one that is uh not easy to understand. Where I mean, it is from somewhat easy to understand where the yield is coming from, but it's not a nonsense yield. Basically, like the yield is you can understand where the yield is coming from, basically, which is Athena sort of tokenized basis trade. Um, and we give a link to a really great post actually from this Substack, Dirt Roads Substack, from I think it's the founder of M0. here, which is like a different protocol. But basically, Athena and SUSDE is like a, I think what they're calling a tokenized basis trade. And the yield there is pretty easy to understand. You have collateral that is in the form of staked ETH for sure. I think there's other forms of collateral now as well, maybe BTC too. So you have the yield from the staked ETH in this case. And then to create a delta neutral position, which is just to mean it's not taking like price risk either. Well, it is taking price risk, but like not it's not exposing you to like the price fluctuations of ETH, for example, is to take a hedge on the other side. In this case, a short using perpetual futures, and it's basically just passing on the yield to you, or some of the yield to you from those positions. And that makes sense because especially in crypto, there tends to be a long bias. People want to be long crypto. So that is paying you basically. And yeah, so there's a much deeper explanation that is here on this Substack. I would very much recommend reading it. And yeah, so that's basically it for Athena and SUSD. So it's pretty interesting, and also, of course, there's some risks that you need to be aware of, like liquidity and negative funding, perhaps that could impact the yield and the integrity of the asset, basically. But those again are really well laid out in this post that I would highly recommend reading. So yeah, anything on XUSE or Athena from you, Javier?
Yeah, no, I think they make it like a super big entrance to the scene, to the industry, and they've been really successful. I mean, we had like the market crash last week, and a few more, and their USD has been super super stable. So yeah, they're doing a really really good job on it.
Totally. Any of these, you can know where the yield is coming from, but they all carry risks. Even the risk-free rate, like DSR, does have some risk involved with it, whether it's regulatory risk or something else. Smart contract risk, even though it's been rock solid throughout all of these years. And that's why we think it's really important to diversify your exposure to these yield sources within your portfolio. And we know that that's something that is pretty hard to do manually. So yeah, that's why you should stay tuned, and you should earn your raise on Summer.fi today. And you'll stay tuned, and you'll get to see how we're probably going to solve that for you with the Summer Earn protocol coming, early 2025. So yeah, thank you so
Yeah,
much, and yeah,
don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. See you, Jordan. Bye bye.
bye.